Hello there, you beautiful people. So in the last video, you got stuck right in and used the most powerful tool on the Linux operating system. But as they say, with great power comes great responsibility. So in order to maximize your control over the Linux operating system, you need to get a solid understanding of what's going on when you type your commands. So over the next few videos, we're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive on what is actually going on when you run your commands, and also go into detail on how the commands are structured so that you can understand how to use them properly. Now, if you do already have some previous Linux experience but didn't feel as though you quite got it, or that something is missing in your understanding, it's very likely that you aren't 100% clear on the stuff that we're going to be covering in the next few videos. So this is super important stuff. Now, whether you do have some previous Linux experience or are a complete beginner to it, I really want you to pay your best attention to the topics that we'll be covering in the next few videos, because they are so critically important to your understanding of the Linux operating system. And if you do understand what we cover in the next few videos, everything you do in Linux will start to make a whole lot more sense. So be very, very excited that we're going to clear this stuff up. Now, in this video, you're going to learn the difference between commands, the terminal, and something called the shell. These are very important distinctions that will underpin basically every single thing that you do on the command line. And by the end of this video, you will have understood the difference between the terminal, the commands, and the shell, and you'll have a much richer and deeper understanding of what is actually going on behind the scenes when you use the terminal. So this is going to be a critically important lecture. Let's go ahead and get into it. So what is actually going on when we type a command? Well, to understand this, we need to know the difference between a command and something called the shell. The commands are just text, but when you press enter, the meaning of that text is interpreted by a computer program called the shell. Okay, so let's take a real world example. If we see the word here on the left, raspberries, on a physical level, that word is just the letters R-A-S-P-B-E-R-R-I-E-S. And just like any other word, if you can't read the language, it won't mean much to you, right? But if you took this word and you could, for example, read English, then what would happen is you would see that text and you would interpret it for meaning. And what might come out is this fruit, okay? You'd see that text and you would match it with this fruit, the raspberries. But there's a process in the middle of interpreting that text into specific meaning, and that is the job of the shell. Okay, so to make this a bit clearer, let's say you took the word gift, okay, and you read that word using the English language, and the meaning that might come out might be the idea of giving someone a present or something on their birthday. Okay, so you might get this meaning coming out from reading the word gift. But instead of reading it in English with an English shell, so we call it, let's say you took exactly the same word, gift, but this time you read it with a German shell. Now, instead of a present coming out, the meaning that might come out of that if you read it in German would be that of poison, which is ironically not the best gift. But you can see here that the text is exactly the same, but the meaning that comes out is different depending upon the shell that interpreted it. Okay? As another example, let's say we took the word smoking. Smoking, if you read that again with an English shell, the meaning that would come out would be the idea of using a cigarette. But if you took exactly the same word and in this time passed it through a French shell, okay, using the analogy here of human interpretation, what would come out would be a tuxedo, which is a fancy type of clothing. So you can see here the text can be exactly the same, but the shell that interprets that text can give it different meaning, and that is exactly the same on your computer. So what about the terminal then? We now understand the difference between a command and the shell. So what's the terminal for? Well, the terminal is nothing more than just a window into the shell. So let's make this a bit easier to understand. So if I asked you, how would you type commands onto your shell without opening the terminal? Well, you couldn't, right? And that's exactly what the terminal is. The terminal is kind of like the middle piece in between using in between typing commands and submitting them to the shell. You can't really type commands anywhere unless you've opened a terminal, and that's all it is. What you're doing is you're typing commands in the terminal, and you press enter, and then they are submitted to the shell. So the terminal is kind of like the middle piece, okay? And there are actually different types of shells. So the different types of shells, just like there are different types of human languages, can actually interpret the same command in different ways. But fortunately, there is one type of shell which has which is the most common type, which is called the bash shell. So if you've ever heard the term bash shell scripting or bash scripting or something like that, it means writing programs and writing scripts that can be read by the bash shell. Now, Linux, most Linux distributions use the bash shell, and Ubuntu definitely does by default. So that's something to bear in mind, that there are different types of shells on Linux. They can interpret commands in different ways, but the most common one is the bash shell. So there we are. We've got some standardization there. So to summarize, commands are really just the text that you type in the terminal, and when you press enter, that text is interpreted by the shell. Now the shell is a program that translates that text into actions for the computer. Now this means that different shells can actually interpret the same text differently, which might cause some problems, but fortunately most Linux machines use the bash shell, so there is consistency across most machines. And as we said as well, the terminal is just a window to the shell. It's just the middle piece that allows you to type your commands and submit them to the shell. And as a bonus piece of information, your commands are actually also case sensitive. So if you type a command in all uppercase, if the shell isn't expecting to see that, it will probably give you an error. So you need to make sure that things are spelled in exactly the correct way. Okay, which has the benefits of allowing you to have more options, because slight differences can give different functionality, but it means you have to be really careful on how you actually type your commands if you want them to work the way you want them to. Now, what's coming up next is, because we're going to spend a lot of the time in this course typing commands and submitting them to the shell, I don't want you to go through this course and just have to memorize loads and loads and loads of different commands, just like pretty much every other course makes you do. What we're going to do is we're going to take a bit of time to understand what commands actually are and how they are structured, so that you can start to see a pattern behind everything. You can start to look at the commands as a type of language rather than just random text on a screen that you've got to memorize. Now, it's likely you'll probably not have been shown this before, so this is going to be a complete game changer in how that you actually approach learning the Linux operating system and learning the terminal. So I really can't wait to show you this. It's going to be really, really, really helpful. So for all that goodness, I'll see you in the next video.